Defiant Serena Williams bid an emotional goodbye to the US Open with a third-round loss to Ajla Tomla-janovic last night in what may have been the last singles match of the 40-year-old's glittering career. Defeat has always been hard to swallow for the fiercely competitive Williams, and no doubt the 7-5, 6-7, 6-1 loss to the 46th-ranked Australian stung Serena to her core. But after a joyous run into the third round, there was no shame in a loss to the gritty Tomla-janovic, allowing the 23 times Grand Slam winner to exit with dignity intact. Serena's three matches, highlighted by a second-round win over world number 2 Annette Kontaveit, were a gift to her fans. Now, Serena says she wants to be remembered as a fighter and is proud of the impact she held on tennis. However, she refused to confirm her retirement just yet and didn't rule out the possibility of turning out at an Australian Open.
There's so many things, to be remembered by. Like the fight. I'm such a fighter. I don't know. I feel like I really brought something and bring something to tennis. Just the different look, the fist pumps, like the just crazy intensity. Like I think that, that's obviously the passion. I think is a really good word. No, I'm not thinking about that. I always did love Australia, though, but yeah, you know what? I think I've come a long way since last year at Wimbledon. Just not sure if that was my last moment or not, and making it a different moment, I think, is much better. Yeah, and it takes a lot of work to get here.
Staying with Serena Williams' end to a glittering career and legacy, I'm now joined by Associate Professor in Political Sociology at the University of London, Awino Okech, to look at the lessons for sportswomen in Africa. Very good evening to you. Thank you so much for joining us, Professor Okech. Serena Williams says she's a fighter who brought something to tennis. A different look was quite imperative, wasn't it?
No, absolutely. I think the Williams sisters have made a great mark on tennis and really generally in terms of questions around understanding race, gender and class and how they intersect with sports, for instance. And in a sport that was predominated by white men and women, that different look is really a racialized look and a defiance in a world that was used to experiencing particular kind of people.
Now, perhaps we should start at the very beginning and speak about the inspirational story and, the humble beginnings, the Williams sisters with their father, who really had a bigger picture of what they would turn out to be.
No, absolutely. And I think, one of the beautiful things about the Williams sisters story, as you point out, is that they don't come from privilege. These are kids who learned how to play tennis in a local, tennis court in their neighborhood in Compton. A father who saw sort of opportunity and talent and nurtured that in very productive ways, but also was very protective of them at a very young age, recognizing what it meant for young people like that to be exposed to a sport that was still struggling with its own sort of racial politics in the US, where that is a really live question. So yes, an important story of humility, underprivileged beginnings, and what we can take away from that.
And, the sort of investment in the sports is something that we saw very strongly when it comes to the Williams sisters and that commitment. Perhaps let's reflect on the, the lessons, the very powerful lessons when it comes to how much it takes to reach that level and sustain it.
Yes, so one of the things that differentiates sort of the U.S. context and, the African continent, that I'm interested in and where you're speaking from at the moment is really what it means to make an important and impactful investment in sports, whether it's tennis or athletics or swimming or other kinds of sporting events that young people might be interested in. I think part of the challenge that we have seen is a really limited government sort of investment in some of these areas, and where that investment has happened, lots of questions, for instance, around how money is used, where it's apportioned to, have really impacted the power and possibility to train a younger generation up into developing sports as a successful career. This also impacts the kinds of investments that are made in public schooling, because I think that is an area pipeline for nurturing talent. It's an investments in public sports facilities and public parks are also an area for nurturing talent, particularly in contexts where there are class differences, economic differences. It's through public investments that you open up the playing field for everyone.
You touched a little bit about color and race in sport, and I suppose the topic is a lot broader, especially when we look at the depictions of descriptions around masculinity when it comes to powerful professional sportswomen. I mean, we see it here at home with Caster Semenya and what happened there. What are some of the lessons that need to be learned in that space, and perhaps the fight back that may be needed?
So, one of the things that people would argue is that what Serena Williams, the Williams sisters and others, people like Caster have done is sort of break, glass ceilings, open pathways. But those pathways have been opened and closed with a lot of difficulty. I think the sort of racism that Serena Williams has faced, both in terms of her experiences on the court, the differential way in which she's treated, the sort of massive expectations that people have of her that they do not necessarily have of other players that are not black, the public depictions of her in the media that really draw on, old racialized and racist tropes about black women, African people, and that are very closely linked to savagery and animalistic tendencies. So these are people who had to encounter and face a lot. Now, people might argue that I think that the sport has learnt a lot, but I do not think so. I think even if you look here in the UK, and the kinds of experiences that black footballers continue to face when they play at home or abroad shows that there's a deeper question around systemic racism in our society that needs to be addressed. Now, both Serena and the Caster Semenya case point to us the intersection of racism and gender there, because this is where the Caster Semenya experience and the Serena Williams experience lift up a different layer to their gendered and racialized experience. That is not solved by bringing more black women. That is not solved by bringing more black people into the sporting arena. That is not solved by bringing more women into the sporting arena. Because for me, what it illustrates is a broader societal problem around how we think about the levers that sustain structural inequality. And we know that race is one of those, we know that gender is one of those, and we know that class is one of those. So it's really a societal question that we are being forced to confront that is showing up in the sports arena.
Yeah, a societal problem that, when you speak about racism, we have to speak about sexism, when we also have to speak about public scrutiny. I mean, we saw what happened with Naomi Osaka. Mental health, a topic that, was often shied away in the public domain. But Serena Williams played an important role there when, she sort of made the space for these conversations to be spoken to.
Indeed, I think the younger generation have become more braver and bolder than even the sub-generation, which I belong to, and the ones before that, in terms of really speaking boldly, clearly, and loudly around questions that most of us would culturally shy away from because of the baggage that comes with it. And I think COVID-19, one of the biggest lessons of the global pandemic and the shutdown that came with it, was really centering and forcing the world collectively to take seriously the meaning of mental health. Now, one of the greatest challenges, though, and this is where the disparities lie, is the kinds of investments that we have on the African continent, for instance, in relation to the skilling of people. We're talking about psychiatrists, psychologists, counselors, the skilling of our public or tooling our public health facilities with specialized services to ensure a sort of broad access to people in relation to mental health illnesses, but also mental health support. And I've seen in my own country, Kenya, the kinds of challenges that sports people who have battled with various sort of mental health illnesses have had to face because of that underfunding of this specific area of health.
Yeah. And what do you think are the much needed interventions and for the platforms that need to be created for these type of conversations to be more open?
So I think there's lots of public conversations that are happening with activists and younger people on social media, which is really important. One of the things that I think is challenging about all of those conversations is that they're happening and the investments that are being made are largely privatized investments, right? So you find a lot of NGOs that are running services. You might find a donor agency that might put money into a hospital to run a specific program for a specific amount of time. Now that's not sustainable. And what we really need for our governments to do is pump more money into that area. The same way we are pumping money into maternal health, thinking about questions of malaria or HIV or TB, that is the same way we need to skill doctors, we need to train doctors, and we need to provide those services in public hospitals, not private hospitals.
Yeah. And you know, when Serena Williams spoke about the future, I mean, she announced that she's leaving to focus on investments, venture capital investing. It sort of broadens the discussion around, you know, the span of a professional sports player, a sportswoman or sportsman, as we take a look at some of the examples that we see here in South Africa, soccer players who end their career and then there's nothing to back them, which speaks to the security of finances and a future within sports. Serena Williams has made a plan and she's been working on it for quite some time.
Yeah, so there's definitely something about career planning or financial investment planning. And I speak as an African, so I recognize that we live in a communal society. When you're successful, you're supporting and managing a whole range of expectations that are just not about the individual. That's the beauty of being an African. We live in community. But I believe that some of that community challenge, particularly when there are vast inequalities in our society, means that one person's success can dim or can immediately erode or disappear the minute they're no longer making that money. And I don't think that our sports management facilities or those who work with sports people in terms of planning their careers have done a really good job of supporting people around financial investment in terms of planning for their future beyond the marathons, the football, etc. And I think that would be an important area, for a big conversation and thinking about how to support our sports people and athletes after, their career is over. And there's something to be learned from Serena there.
Yeah, absolutely. Serena says that she's evolving away from tennis. I mean, also saying that it shouldn't come as a surprise if you see her again on the court. But, perhaps in reflecting on the kind of legacy she leaves behind, what do you think stands out?
I think, Serena, to use that word that people, argue needs to be thought about a little bit more robustly. I think Serena is the epitome of black excellence, right? Serena, for me, is the epitome of somebody who has had to deal with a lot of difficulties and has come through the other end stronger, shoulders up, facing forward, and unwilling to be put down by everything that she has encountered. That does not mean that is how we should face life. But I think I would always want to remember Serena as being an amazing sports person, an amazing athlete, and somebody who has been defiant. And that defiance is important in a world that is unjust and in a world that is often violent for people like her. People like her.
What do you think the media can learn when it comes to the representation of women in sport and black women? I mean, I remember years ago looking at the front page of a newspaper where the image was of Serena Williams behind. I mean, this is a champion, one of the greatest in the world, and that's how she was perceived and depicted.
Yeah, the media can learn a lot. I think one of the biggest debates, for instance, around mental health was these kinds of expectations that people have around the fact that you're an athlete in a high-pressured environment. You come out from losing a match and you're supposed to be able to sit there comfortably asking questions or answering questions as though you're not feeling any particular way about having lost, for instance. So there's something even in that basic interaction with sports, the media fraternity that work in sports in terms of handling athletes, whether they've won or lost in a particular situation, recognizing that they're human at the end of the day. There are gendered questions, the sexism issue that you raised earlier, that the media continues to battle with, and they really need to think carefully about both in relation to how they write about women, whether you're talking about political leaders or athletes, the kinds of images that are put out about women. And I know that you're a media person, so you all know about angles and what those angles depict and what they can do in terms of representation. So there's a lot to be done there. And if we add race into that, there's a larger conversation around the depiction of black women. Let's move away from the angry black woman trope, and let's think about people in their complexity as human beings with emotions, feelings, and much more broader connections to our society.
Some sound analysis there. Thank you so much for your time. That was Professor Awino Okech of the University of London. Let's now